Good morning. My name is Keely Severson from Exposing Mold. Good morning. Welcome to Wellness Wednesday. I thought, gonna welcome the newest mold exposer. Here he is. He's gonna be making a lot of guest appearances. So hopefully this will go smoothly. Probably not. A lot of people after a mold remediation ask themselves, why am I still sick? And this is a question that we get frequently. And, thank you, Sheena. And it's a common question of why am I still sick after remediation? And then it's also a common thought afterwards of, well, it must not have been the mold. I remediated the mold or I left the mold and I'm still sick, so that wasn't my problem. And that's not necessarily the case because we have a baby crying and he wants to be fed. It's not necessarily the case because there are reasons and explanations as to why you could still be sick from mold inside your home even after you've had a remediation. And so we are going to review. Whoa, honey, you scared the baby. It's okay. We're going to review a few of the reasons why you could still be sick after remediation. These include failures with remediation, incomplete remediation, failures with testing, possible contamination of items, and developing a chronic health problem from mold. Those are all factors. So mold remediation failures can include somebody coming in and using a chemical treatment of some type. Mold really needs to fully be removed. So if someone comes in and fogs or uses another chemical enzyme treatment, that's not considered a real mold remediation. Another thing that could cause a mold remediation failure is some kind of surface cleaning, just getting the surface of the mold off of the wood, like dry ice blasting or physically scraping mold off. Those techniques are going to leave the roots in the mold. So if humidity and moisture allows it in the future, mold would grow back from those roots. So chemically treating instead of full removal, not doing full removal. And because a lot of people don't understand what's required for a mold remediation, they're not necessarily always screening their mold companies to say, what chemicals do you use? What's exactly your process? People don't necessarily know how to screen that full process. And so they might think that they had this great mold remediation that was promised to fix their health in their house. And so when they're not healthy afterwards, they are forced to ask the question, was it not the mold? And really, unfortunately, it's more common that it still was the mold and it still is the mold, but whoever you had at your house, they just repeated what they were told or what they were taught. And unfortunately, the education of the mold testers and a lot of mold remediators doesn't deep dive to fully address the complexity of some health presentations that after a mold injury. So another reason you might still be sick after a mold remediation, even though you think you're fine, is mold testing failures. If you did an air test to kind of prove that your house is clear after a remediation, that could work against you no matter the result. If the result shows just one spore, it could possibly indicate that mold was kicked up during remediation or it wasn't all removed, especially if it's a heavy spore like Stachybotrys. And your mold testing company might say, oh no, this is standard for post remediation. We kicked up dust, so you're going to see something in the air. Even if your air test was 0, if you had a lot of toxic molds, because they're not often found in air tests, it might just not be picking up. And the other thing is some fogging agents can interfere with the use of an ERMI. So if the last stage of remediation was fogging and then an ERMI was used to prove that your house had no mold spores in it afterwards, that's another way that mold testing maybe wouldn't find the problem. Good morning, Amy. The last reason that, the last thing that mold testing can't really find for someone who's still sick after a remediation is mold testing cannot find contamination of items. So there actually is no test that can tell you if your items will make you sick. There's no way to check to see if items are contaminated with mycotoxins. People incorrectly believe that if it doesn't have mold growth or mold spores on it, then it's absolutely fine. There are some companies that even recommend these complex cleaning standards and IICRC professionals with tons of letters after their names that will recommend these complex cleaning protocols. If you've done a cleaning protocol like that and you're still not feeling well, that could be why, because mycotoxin contamination doesn't wash off or doesn't clean off. And it has to do with the molecular properties of the mycotoxin. They actually molecularly bind to items after a certain point, and a molecular bind can't be washed off. And so this is a position. Acknowledging that possessions can keep you ill is a position that exposing mold gets criticized for. Don't create fear. Don't incorrectly tell people to get rid of their belongings. We don't want everyone to throw anything in the garbage, but if people take stuff with them and it's still making you sick, we want you to be aware of why and why it's possible and why the recommendation is to take a little break from your stuff to see if you could be sick from it. So another thing that people don't realize is that there's actually no test that exists that can see mycotoxins in the house. So yes, I know someone's going to come in the comments and say there's the dust test for mycotoxins. That tells you if mycotoxins that they can test for are in your dust. That doesn't tell you anything about what's in the air. It doesn't tell you what's in the belongings, and it can only find what it's testing for. So there's no test that can test for mycotoxin contamination of items, and that's it's a big thing that keeps people residually kept sick. Amy Joy says, yes, I'm seeing that. Thanks for explaining the science behind it. Oh, you must be seeing people tell other people to throw things away. Yeah, I didn't, no one had told me that I didn't fully know that, the process of trying to get clear when I left. So I made a lot of mistakes, and I did end up bringing some stuff with me, even though we abandoned 90% or 95% of what we owned. But it was really, really shocking to me when I began to realize how ill I was still because of my items and feeling different when they're not there. And so that's why I talk about it. I don't want people kept sick and being told that it's this autoimmune condition or that autoimmune condition, when maybe the provider that told you that was missing the step on how to screen for contamination exposure. And I think that's the key in a lot of cases. So the third reason you're still kept sick, we've been talking about it, it's contamination of items. I've already explained that there is no test to confirm. This is why it's confusing. If there's no mold growth and there's nothing visible, an item should be completely fine. And for many people, maybe those items are fine. But if you are residually sick and you have lupus or fibromyalgia or any other illness or autoimmune illness or chronic pain or mental health disorder, it's worth considering. The World Health Organization calls mycotoxin illness, the great masquerader, because mycotoxicoses can manifest as so many other signs and symptoms of your health and can be misdiagnosed all of the time. So, what I see happening with my patients is that they did a remediation. There's tons of red flags on the remediation. It was probably never going to be successful to begin with. They didn't believe that their items could be kept sick, or maybe they moved and they wanted to take their items with them because they didn't believe they could keep them sick. And then they're told that they still have fibromyalgia, they still have anxiety. You will still have pain symptoms and energy fatigue symptoms of fibromyalgia and mental health symptoms if you're around something that's contaminated, because those are two ways that it affects you. Now, the fourth reason you might not be feeling better after a mold remediation is that you may have ventured into the land of mold hypersensitivity. This is thought of as an immune system injury that turns you into a walking mold radar, where you always can identify contaminants or mold in your environment because your immune system lets you know that it's there. This sensitivity can be healed quite a bit, but part of the sensitivity in terms of a mold radar always lingers, and it seems to serve as a protective mechanism so that you don't lull yourself into accidentally staying in mold much longer than your body can tolerate. Again, another time past the time that the exposure that caused the immune system injury. Immune system injuries from toxic mold do not depend on your genetics, and people who have hypersensitivity to mold oftentimes will think that they have just Lyme or co-infections or something else, and they'll very often be missing the mold piece, and they tend to chase these co-infections or these other illnesses relentlessly, maybe making a little bit of progress here and there, maybe improving their quality of life, but never fully getting to the bottom of it, and maybe also getting worse in some areas. So if that's the category you're in with chronic Lyme or a co-infection or an autoimmune disorder, you likely have had an exposure to mold that tipped you into hypersensitivity, and you're just kind of missing that piece of how much sensitivity to mold can hinder healing. So I did realize that I was sensitized to mold long before I realized I was sensitized to mold. And I share that to say you could be sensitized to mold long before you realize, and it could be affecting your health before you even find it. So if you've had a remediation and you're still not feeling well, please consider that possibly the remediation wasn't successful. I'm really sorry to say, I feel like I'm always on here giving everyone like bad news, but someone has to be the one to tell you that you could still possibly be sick after remediation. If nobody tells you that, you're going to just think you have another condition your whole entire life. So, but as I was saying, if you are still sick after remediation, these could be the reasons why. The remediation might not have been a full remediation in terms of actually fully removing the mold, which is what you need. Maybe the structural components of water intrusion or moisture issues were not fully addressed. Maybe the home was cleared by a test result that said there was no mold, and there was still some mycotoxin or still some toxic mold sources that were not identified. Maybe all of the mold was actually removed, but perhaps your items are contaminated and you didn't believe that was possible because there's no mold growth on them. Maybe just your vehicle and some items are contaminated and you're circling this loop with thinking that you have fibromyalgia because you're not. Maybe nobody ever told you that just a few molecules of this stuff with a permanent immune system injury can keep you in an illness presentation. So I just wanted to share that information that so that people have it, because a lot of times what I hear is, well, I had a remediation or I left mold and I'm still sick. So that obviously wasn't the problem. And I just wanted to explain a few reasons why that might not necessarily be correct. Thank you so much for joining Wellness Wednesday. We will catch you next time. Say bye. Oh, I think I woke him out. Darn it. Bye. Hi, cutie dude. Oh, he waved. He kind of waved. All right. Bye, everyone.